The colony stood on the edge of a wide desert plain. Strange winds howled through the metal walls at night, and during the day the sun burned like fire. Life here was not easy. Both humans and aliens had come together to build this settlement, but trust between them was still thin. Everyone knew survival meant working together, but old habits of suspicion were hard to erase. Among the aliens lived Riva, the fiercest woman in the colony. She belonged to a warrior people, tall and strong, with dark armor-like skin that shimmered under the sun. Riva was known as a fighter who never lost a battle. When beasts attacked the farms, she was the first to charge. When raiders threatened the gates, she held the front line with her spear. To many, she was a hero. To others, she was terrifying. Humans respected her strength, but they also kept their distance. She had little patience for their soft ways and quick complaints. To her, humans seemed fragile, too quick to panic, too slow to act. She had no interest in them. She believed they survived only because aliens like her stood guard. Then came Dan, a human worker newly assigned to the colony. He was not tall, not strong, and not loud like some others. He was quiet, often seen carrying tools on his belt and a notebook in his pocket. While others tried to boast or shout, Dan simply listened. He spent hours repairing broken machines, walking the walls, and studying the land around the colony. Most people hardly noticed him. Riva noticed him only once at first when the siren rang. It was midday, and the alarm howled across the settlement. A pack of desert beasts had broken through the outer field fence. Their bodies were large, covered in spines, and their jaws snapped with hunger. Workers screamed and ran for shelter, but the creatures moved fast, tearing across the sand toward the crop fields. Riva grabbed her spear and rushed forward. She barked orders to her squad, her voice sharp and commanding. The aliens followed her lead, forming a line of defense near the fence. But as the beasts charged, something caught her eye. One of the workers had not run. A human Dan was standing between two damaged machines in the field. Instead of fleeing, he pulled loose wires from the broken fence and forced them into a nearby power unit. Sparks flew, and the machines roared back to life. With a hiss, a burst of electricity arced across the sand, startling the beasts and slowing their advance. The line of aliens seized the chance. Riva charged, striking with her spear. Her warriors joined, driving the beasts back into the desert. The fight was quick but fierce, and when it ended, the colony stood safe. Breathing hard, Riva turned and saw the human still standing there, his hands blackened with smoke from the wires. He had not lifted a weapon, yet his act had saved many lives. Workers gathered around him, speaking in relief. Dan only nodded quietly, as if it were nothing. Riva walked over, her shadow long in the sun. The crowd parted quickly, nervous to see the fierce warrior near. She stopped in front of him, her sharp eyes fixed on his calm face. "You," she said in her deep voice. "Why did you not run?" Dan looked up at her, sweat still on his brow. If the machines worked, the beasts would stop. Running would have helped no one. Riva studied him. His voice was steady, without fear. She had expected trembling or excuses, but he offered neither. There was no pride in his tone, no attempt to impress her. Only simple fact. "You risked death," she said. "So did you," he answered. For the first time in many years, Riva felt a pause inside her chest. Most humans looked at her with fear or admiration, but this one looked at her as if she were simply another person. He did not bow. He did not boast. He only spoke as if her question was ordinary. The others began to leave, returning to their duties, but Riva stood still. She did not know why, but her eyes lingered on this human longer than she intended. Something in her heart stirred, though she would not name it yet. Later that night, the colony returned to its uneasy calm. Fires burned low, guards walked the walls, and people spoke of the beast attack. Many mentioned the quiet human who had stopped the creatures with his quick thinking. Some laughed, saying perhaps humans were not as weak as they seemed. Others dismissed it as luck. But Riva did not laugh. She sat alone in her quarters, her spear beside her, and thought of the moment when Dan had looked into her eyes without fear. She was the fiercest alien in the colony, yet for the first time, she wondered if strength was not the only thing that mattered. And though she would never admit it aloud, she was curious about the human who had dared to stand where others ran. The colony council decided new patrols were needed. After the beast attack, they feared raiders might test the defenses next. The colony stood between many trade routes, and enemies often tried to take food and supplies. To keep the walls safe, both aliens and humans had to work together. Riva disliked this decision. She trusted her alien warriors, but she did not trust humans to fight beside her. Most of them, she believed, were too soft for the hard desert. But the council wanted unity, and unity meant mixed patrols. Her frustration deepened when she saw the list of names. At the top stood her own, and beside it, one human named Dan. She remembered the quiet worker who had stood firm during the beast attack. She respected his bravery, but that did not mean she wanted him at her side. He was no soldier. He had no spear, no armor. Yet the council had chosen him. The next morning, she waited at the gates, spear in hand, her tall figure a sharp shadow in the rising sun. Soon Dan arrived, carrying only a small pack and a short blade at his side. His calm face annoyed her. She had expected nervousness, perhaps fear. But once again, he looked steady. "You should not be here," Riva said, her voice flat. "Council says I should," Dan replied simply. "You are no warrior." "I fix things," he said, tightening the straps on his pack. "Machines, fences, gates. That is my strength. Patrol needs more than spears." Riva narrowed her eyes. His words carried no arrogance, only calm certainty. Still, she turned away. "Stay behind me," she ordered. "If danger comes, you will not slow me down." Dan gave no answer. He only followed as they set out into the desert. The desert stretched wide and empty, a sea of red sand broken by sharp black stones. Patrols were long and tiring, with hours of walking under the burning sun. For a time, neither spoke. The only sound was the crunch of their boots in the sand and the whistle of dry wind. At last, Dan spoke. "How long have you lived here?" "Since birth," Riva answered. "You like it?" "It is my duty." "Liking does not matter." Dan gave a small nod, as though he understood. "Humans came later. We thought it would be easier. We were wrong." Riva glanced at him. Most humans complained loudly about the hardships, but this one spoke quietly, with no bitterness. Again, she felt the strange pull of curiosity. Hours passed, and they came upon a dry canyon where the air grew heavy. Riva raised her hand for silence. She had heard something, footsteps not their own. Shadows moved among the rocks. A band of raiders stepped out, their armor mismatched, their weapons crude but deadly. There were 5 of them, circling like wolves. "Drop your packs," one raider growled. "Leave, and you live." Riva stepped forward, spear ready, her eyes fierce. "You will not touch this colony," she declared. The raiders laughed. One alien woman and her pet human? Easy prey. Riva braced for the fight, but before she could strike, Dan spoke. "They want easy prey. Let's not be easy." He dropped to one knee, opening his pack. The raiders sneered, thinking he meant surrender. But from the pack he pulled a small device, one of his own repairs, a compact tool with wires and a small power cell. He twisted the ends together, and the device sparked to life, sending out a high-pitched whine. The sand beneath the raiders' feet vibrated, stirring dust into the air. The noise grew sharper, painful to the ears. Startled, the raiders staggered back, covering their heads. In that moment, Riva charged. Her spear flashed, striking the ground near their leader's foot. The earth split, and the raider stumbled. With a roar, her presence alone drove them back. They were not prepared for such resistance. Within moments, they turned and fled into the canyon shadows. Breathing hard, Riva turned to Dan. He still knelt there, holding the sparking device. His hands shook slightly, but his eyes were steady. "You fought with wires," she said, almost in disbelief. "I fought with what I know," he answered. He shut the device off, the whining sound fading. "I cannot swing a spear like you. But I can make enemies think twice." For a long moment, Riva stared at him. Then, for the first time, she gave a short nod of respect. They finished the patrol in silence, but the silence was different this time. It was not cold or tense. It was heavy with thought. When they returned to the colony, the council asked for their report. Riva spoke little of the raiders, saying only that they had been driven away. But she could not hide one truth from herself: Dan had not slowed her down. In fact, he had turned the fight in their favor. That night, Riva sat outside her quarters, watching the stars. She had always believed humans were fragile, but now she wondered. Perhaps strength did not only mean muscle and weapons. Perhaps strength could also mean cleverness, patience, or courage. And perhaps, she thought reluctantly, this quiet human carried more strength than many of her own kind. The days after the patrol passed quietly, yet something had changed in the colony. Rumors spread about the raider attack. Some said Riva had fought off 5 raiders with only her spear. Others whispered that a human had stood beside her and used strange tricks to frighten the enemy away. Most people laughed at the idea. A human, fighting raiders. Impossible. Yet those who had seen Dan's calm way of walking the streets now looked at him differently. He did not boast, he did not defend himself, but his silence made the whispers stronger. Riva heard the rumors too. She told no one what had really happened. To her, it was not a story for the crowd. It was something between her and the quiet human. Life in the colony grew harder. Food was short, water tanks leaked, and arguments often broke out between humans and aliens. Many blamed each other for every problem. Riva had no patience for such quarrels. She trained her warriors, patrolled the walls, and kept order with sharp words. She believed unity came from strength, not from endless talking. But one evening, as she walked past the workshop near the human quarters, she stopped. Through the open door, she saw Dan bent over a broken machine. Sparks lit his face as he worked with steady hands. Around him stood 3 young aliens, watching silently. The machine had been used to grind grain for food. It had been broken for weeks, and many argued about who should fix it. Yet here was Dan, alone, repairing it without being asked. He did not demand thanks, nor did he expect reward. He only worked, sweat on his brow, as though it was the most natural thing to do. Riva did not step inside. She only watched, her heart unsettled. The next day, she found herself walking beside him during wall duty. He carried tools, while she carried her spear. The silence stretched until at last she spoke. "You fix machines that are not yours," she said. Dan shrugged. "If they are broken, they belong to everyone. A machine does not care who owns it. It only wants to work." Riva frowned. "Machines do not want. They are tools." "Maybe," Dan said, tightening a bolt. "But sometimes tools are more loyal than people. They do what they are made to do, if you give them care." Riva looked at him sharply. His words carried weight, though spoken softly. For the first time, she wondered if wisdom could hide beneath quietness. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, Riva began to notice Dan more often. He helped repair the water pumps when they failed. He fixed the lights in the alien quarter, even though no human lived there. He taught alien children how to handle simple tools, showing patience she had rarely seen. Others did not always appreciate him. Some humans muttered that he cared more for aliens than his own kind. Some aliens scoffed that a human worker could not replace true warriors. But Riva saw more than they did. She saw how he listened when others spoke, how he refused to answer anger with anger, and how he acted when no one asked him to. One evening, while walking the edge of the colony, she asked him, "Why do you care for those who insult you?" Dan looked at the desert horizon. "Because survival needs everyone. If I fix only for those I like, then tomorrow the others will fall, and we all fall with them." Riva was silent. His words cut deep into her pride. She had always thought strength came from standing above others, not beside them. Yet here was a human who believed survival was not about pride, but about bonds. That night, a sandstorm hit the colony. Wind screamed against the walls, shaking the towers. Dust poured into every crack, blinding the guards. People rushed to secure their homes. Riva fought through the storm, helping to close the gates, when she saw Dan struggling with a water pipe that threatened to burst. Sparks flew as the storm ripped wires free. Without hesitation, he threw his pack aside and clung to the pipe, trying to hold it steady. "Leave it," a guard shouted. "You will be crushed." But Dan did not move. His hands bled against the sharp edges, but he stayed. If the pipe broke, the colony would lose half its water. Riva stormed through the dust, grabbed the pipe with her own hands, and together they forced it back into place. She roared commands, calling workers to seal it fast. When at last the danger passed, Dan sank to the ground, exhausted. Riva stood over him, her chest rising and falling. She wanted to shout at him for his foolishness. She wanted to tell him he was reckless. But the words would not come. Instead, she heard her own voice soften. "You should have let it go." Dan wiped the dust from his face. "If I had, many would have died of thirst." His simple words struck her harder than any weapon. She realized then that his courage was not loud like hers, but it was no less strong. Later, when the storm ended, the colony gathered to count the losses. Many roofs were gone, but the water stores remained safe. People praised the warriors who had fought the winds, but few knew that a quiet human and a fierce alien had held the pipe together in the dark. Riva knew. And she felt something grow inside her, something she could not name. It was not just respect. It was not just curiosity. It was a bond, silent but strong, forming like stone under pressure. For the first time in her life, Riva realized she was no longer standing alone. The colony had grown quiet after the storm, but peace never lasted long on the frontier world. One morning, alarms rang across the settlement. A massive sandstorm, stronger than any before, was approaching. It tore across the desert with blinding speed. Anyone caught outside could be lost forever. Riva and Dan were already patrolling when the alarm sounded. Riva's instincts sharpened. She had faced beasts, raiders, and harsh winds before, but this storm was different. It was not an enemy she could fight with a spear. It was a test of endurance, patience, and courage. "Everyone back to the walls!" Riva shouted, her voice cutting through the wind. Aliens and humans scrambled to secure the colony, tying down roofs, sealing doors, and moving supplies to safer areas. Dust whipped into their eyes, making every step dangerous. Dan moved beside her, carrying a crate of emergency supplies. He did not complain. He only followed her lead, climbing over debris, checking weak points in the walls, and offering instructions to workers. "You move too slow." Riva snapped at one human, who stumbled against the wind. Dan shook his head. Rushing makes mistakes worse. We need calm hands. Riva glared, but she noticed that his method worked. Despite the fury of the storm, the workers moved faster under his guidance than they had under her yelling. Hours passed, and the storm only grew stronger. A section of the outer wall had begun to collapse. Riva ran toward it, spear ready to hold the structure while workers reinforced it. As she reached the spot, she saw something that made her heart skip. A group of children, caught outside when the storm hit, were clinging to a small shed. The wind threatened to tear the structure apart. Without thinking, Dan dashed forward, reaching the children just as a wooden beam snapped. He held the youngest child in his arms, shouting instructions to the older ones. Riva followed at top speed, gripping her spear and shouting orders. She reached Dan and the children in time to push them into safety as a larger beam fell where they had been standing moments before. Her chest heaved as she looked at Dan. He was scratched and bleeding slightly from flying debris, but he smiled through the dust. "They're safe," he said simply. Riva wanted to scold him for risking his life, but the words died in her throat. Instead, she felt something unfamiliar, a mixture of relief and respect so deep it startled her. The storm raged into the afternoon. Riva and Dan moved from place to place, repairing walls, reinforcing roofs, and rescuing anyone trapped outside. They worked as a team, moving quickly and efficiently. Sometimes Riva would strike with her spear to block falling debris, other times Dan would use tools and quick thinking to prevent a wall from collapsing. Together, they saved lives that would have been lost in the chaos. At one point, a section of the water storage tower began to crack. Water gushed out, threatening to flood the lower quarters. Dan looked at Riva. "We need to stop it now." Riva nodded. "Cover the lower walls. I'll hold it steady." He worked quickly, using ropes and clamps while Riva braced the structure with all her strength. The tower groaned but held, and water remained mostly contained. When the danger passed, both of them fell to the ground, gasping for breath, covered in dust and sweat. Riva stared at Dan, her chest still rising and falling. "Why did you risk yourself so many times?" she asked, almost softly. Dan shrugged. "If I stayed safe while others suffered, I would not be helping. Everyone here counts, alien or human. That is enough reason." Her heart, usually guarded and fierce, felt a strange warmth. She had fought countless battles and faced death many times, yet none of those moments had shaken her the way this quiet human had, with his courage, his care, and his steady presence. When the storm finally ended, the colony looked different. Many buildings were damaged, but few lives were lost. Humans and aliens alike praised the warriors who had fought through the wind, but few knew the truth. Behind every rescue, every saved life, had been a quiet human and a fierce alien, working side by side. The council called a meeting that evening. Riva stood with her warriors, proud as always. Dan stood beside her, quiet and steady. The council spoke of the courage of all those who had helped, but when they mentioned the human workers, Riva noticed something. Eyes turned to her, expecting her to say something. She did not speak at first. Then, looking at Dan, she said simply, "He saved lives today, as much as anyone. Do not forget that." A murmur went through the crowd. Humans nodded quietly, surprised to hear praise from the fearsome alien warrior. Aliens exchanged glances, realizing that this human had shown courage and wisdom beyond expectation. Riva did not feel the need to add more. Words were not enough. Dan had proven himself in action, and that was all that mattered. Later, when the stars shone above the calm desert, Riva walked alone for a while. She remembered the storm, the danger, and the fear in the eyes of those she had saved. But she also remembered Dan, calm, steady, and fearless in his own quiet way. For the first time, Riva realized that courage was not only about strength or skill. It could also be patience, intelligence, and care. And she knew something else, too. Her heart had begun to change, though she could not yet admit it. Dan had become more than a quiet human beside her. He had become someone she could trust with lives, with danger, and perhaps, one day, with more than she had ever thought possible. After the storm passed, the colony began to rebuild. Walls were repaired, crops replanted, and machines brought back to life. Life returned to a cautious normal, yet something subtle had shifted between humans and aliens. Trust grew in small ways, and the quiet human, Dan, was no longer overlooked. Riva noticed him more than ever. She watched as he moved through the colony, repairing damaged equipment, helping children with simple lessons, or quietly guiding workers through tasks. He did not boast, nor did he seek praise, but his acts of courage and care left impressions that words could not capture. For Riva, the feelings inside her grew harder to ignore. She had always been the fiercest alien in the colony, proud and untouchable. No one had ever come close to her heart. But now, she found herself noticing Dan in moments she could not explain, the way his calm eyes met hers, the way he seemed to move through danger without fear, and the quiet kindness he showed to everyone. One evening, after the colony had finished its daily chores, Riva found herself walking near the edge of the desert, away from the bustle of the settlement. The sun was low, casting long shadows over the sand. She had come here to think, to reflect on what had happened during the storm. Dan appeared beside her without a sound, carrying a small repair kit. "Evening," he said softly. Riva did not respond immediately. She was unaccustomed to speaking to him outside of duty. "You are still helping," she finally said. He smiled faintly. "Things need fixing. People need help. That does not end because the sun is low." She looked at him, feeling a strange warmth. "You seem different from the others," she admitted. Dan tilted his head. "Different how?" "Calm. Brave. Thoughtful. You do not complain. You do not demand attention. And yet you save lives." He shrugged modestly. "I do what I can. That is all." Riva stared at him in silence. His humility irritated her pride and yet drew her closer in ways she did not understand. Days passed, and the colony faced new challenges. Supplies were low, and arguments arose about sharing food and water. Many humans blamed aliens for taking too much. Many aliens blamed humans for being careless. Riva stood in the center of the conflicts, speaking sharply to both sides, insisting that survival required cooperation. Through it all, Dan was always near. He did not argue. He quietly helped redistribute supplies, repaired machines, and guided workers. Riva saw him act without pride, without expectation, and she began to realize that his courage was not the same as hers. Hers was loud, direct, and fierce. His was quiet, patient, and enduring. Both were strong, yet different. One afternoon, Riva found herself beside him as he repaired a water pump. The sun reflected off the metal, and the desert stretched endlessly around them. She worked in silence, but her mind raced. "You never rest," she said suddenly. Dan glanced at her, wiping sweat from his brow. "Rest comes later. First, we make sure everyone survives." "You care for them," Riva said quietly. "Even those who do not care for you." Dan's gaze softened. "Care is not about return. It is about responsibility." Riva's chest tightened. She had never considered such a way of living. Strength for her had always been power and skill. But now she saw a new kind of strength, a strength of heart, steady and unwavering. That evening, she walked alone to the edge of the colony again. She found herself thinking about Dan in moments she could not name. How he had faced danger calmly. How he had helped the children. How he had worked tirelessly without complaint. Her pride, which had once been a shield around her heart, now felt like it was melting. When Dan appeared, as if sensing her thoughts, she did not speak immediately. Instead, she watched the way he moved among the dust and the fading light. His presence was comforting and strong, though different from her own fierce energy. Finally, she said softly, "I do not understand why I care so much." Dan looked at her, his eyes steady. "Perhaps it is because you see what others cannot. Or perhaps it is because we notice those who do not shout, but act." Riva's gaze fell to the sand. She felt the truth of his words. She had never met anyone like him. Her heart, guarded and proud for so long, was beginning to whisper in ways she could not ignore. The next morning, the colony awoke to clearer skies. The sun shone warmly, and the desert looked less threatening after the recent storms. Riva and Dan patrolled together, side by side. They spoke little, but each action, each glance, carried unspoken understanding. Riva realized she was no longer the same. Her fierceness remained, but now it was paired with curiosity, respect, and an unspoken bond that grew stronger with every shared challenge. She did not yet know what the future would hold, but one thing was certain: Dan had become more than an ally. He had touched her heart in a way no one else ever had. And the whispers of that heart would not be ignored. The colony stood on the edge of fear. From the watchtowers, smoke rose in the distance. Raiders were coming again, but this time not with a small group. An army marched behind their leader, and beside him stood the traitor who had betrayed the colony. Rhina's sharp eyes burned with anger as she watched. "They come to break us once and for all," she said. Her voice was steady, but her chest felt heavy. Marco stood beside her, holding a small toolkit strapped to his belt. Unlike the warriors, he carried no blade, no spear, no heavy weapon. Yet he looked at the battlefield with calm eyes. "We can win," he said quietly. Rhina almost laughed. "You still believe that, human?" Marco turned to her. "I don't believe. I know. Because we are not going to fight with only strength. We will fight with everything: your warriors, my machines, and our will." His words settled inside her like fire. She gave a short nod. "Then stand with me, Marco. If I fall, you must not." The horns of the raiders echoed. The battle had begun. The colony gates shook under the first wave of attack. Rhina roared, leading her warriors into the storm. She moved like lightning, her blade flashing, her shield breaking enemy lines. Around her, her people fought bravely, but the raiders were many. Marco worked behind them, setting up energy traps and quick defenses. With broken scrap, he built small barriers that blasted sparks when touched. Raiders stumbled into his tricks and fell back in confusion. "More power to the left wall," he shouted to the workers. "Rhina is holding them, but the shields will fail if we don't move faster." Rhina heard his voice through the clash of steel. She smiled for a moment. Even in chaos, Marco's courage shone brighter than weapons. The traitor appeared on the battlefield. His voice rose above the noise. "Rhina, your time is over. You trusted a human, and now your people will burn for it." Rhina's eyes locked on him. Her fury rose, but before she could charge, a group of raiders pushed forward with heavy cannons. They aimed at the colony walls. If they fired, everything would be lost. "Marco," she shouted. He had already seen it. With quick steps, he ran across open ground, tools sparking in his hands. The raiders laughed at the unarmed human. They thought he was no threat. But Marco reached the power cables near the cannons and struck them with his tool. A blast of light exploded, shorting the weapons. The raiders were thrown back, shouting in pain and fear. The colony cheered. Even Rhina, in the middle of battle, felt her heart swell. "That human," she whispered, "he fights with no blade, yet his fire burns greater than mine." The battle raged on. Dust and smoke covered the air. The colony shields flickered, nearly breaking. Rhina cut down another enemy, her body aching from wounds. Still she stood tall, her voice guiding her people. At the walls, Marco kept building. His hands were black with burns, but he did not stop. He shaped broken metal into new defenses, each one slowing the raiders step by step. Finally, the traitor came forward with his blade raised high. He charged at Marco, hoping to end the human who gave the colony hope. "Marco!" Rhina cried. But Marco did not step back. He lifted a heavy pipe, not as a weapon but as a shield. The traitor struck hard, sparks flying. Marco fell to one knee, but he did not let go. In that moment, Rhina leapt across the battlefield. Her blade met the traitors in a storm of steel. "You betrayed us," she shouted, "but worse, you tried to break the one who gave us strength." Her fury was unstoppable. Blow after blow forced the traitor back. With one final strike, she disarmed him. The colony warriors rushed forward, capturing him. The raiders, seeing their leader fall and their cannons broken, lost their spirit. They turned and fled into the wastelands. The battle was won. Silence spread over the field. The colony stood among broken walls and smoking ground, but they were alive. Rhina stood tall, her body cut and bruised, her blade dripping with dust. She looked at Marco, who was breathing hard, his hands shaking from the fight. She walked to him slowly. Around them, the people watched in awe. The fiercest warrior of their colony, the one who never bowed, now stood face to face with the human who had saved them. "You fought without fear," she said. Her voice was softer than the wind. "You built hope when all was falling apart. Today, you were not only a human. You were my equal." Marco looked into her eyes, tired but smiling. "We did this together, Rhina. You with your strength. Me with my hands. Alone, we would have fallen. Together, we stood." Rhina's chest swelled with pride, but also something new, something warmer than victory. She lifted her blade high, shouting so all could hear. "This human stands with us. His courage is our shield. His heart is stronger than any weapon. Remember this day, the day strength and wisdom fought as one." The colony roared with cheers. For the first time, humans and aliens celebrated as one people. Rhina turned back to Marco, her fierce eyes softer than ever before. She did not speak again, but her look said everything. The battle was over. The bond was sealed. The colony was quiet after the great battle. The smoke from burning machines had faded, and the cries of war were gone. What remained was silence, broken walls, wounded warriors, and a tired people standing in the ruins of their home. But there was also something else, hope. For the first time in many years, the colony had fought back the raiders with courage that surprised even themselves. They had seen strength not only in the blade of Rhina, their fiercest warrior, but also in the clever hands of Marco, the human who came with no weapon yet gave them victory. The people gathered in the central square, where a broken statue of an old leader once stood. Now it was only stone and dust, but still the colony came together. Rhina stood in front of them, her armor scarred, her blade hanging at her side. She looked at her people with steady eyes. They were waiting for her words, as they always had. But beside her stood Marco, quiet and unsure. He had never stood before a crowd like this. His clothes were torn, his hands burned, yet his back was straight. Rhina raised her hand. "We have lived many years in fear," she began. "The raiders thought they could crush us. Even our own kin betrayed us. But we are still here." The people murmured with pride. She turned slightly, her gaze falling on Marco. Her voice grew stronger. "We did not stand alone. This human, Marco, fought at my side. His hands built walls from broken scrap. His mind turned defeat into hope. His courage burned brighter than fire. Marco tried to shake his head, humble as always, but Rhina would not let him hide. "I was the fiercest of my people," she said, her voice ringing through the square. "I believed strength meant standing above all others. But this battle has taught me truth. Real strength is standing together. Real courage is found in the heart. And no heart is greater than his." The crowd roared with cheers. Some shouted Rhina's name. Others called for Marco. For the first time, human and alien voices joined as one. When the noise faded, Rhina stepped closer to Marco. She spoke not to the crowd, but to him. "You came here as an outsider. I saw you as weak. I was wrong. You are my equal, and more. You are the one who gave me strength when my own was not enough." Marco's tired face softened into a small smile. "I only did what had to be done." "Anyone would have no," Rhina interrupted. "Not anyone. Only you. And for that, I give you what I have never given to another." The people leaned closer, waiting. Rhina knelt slightly, lowering her head, a sign of respect no warrior of her kind had ever shown. "My heart is yours, Marco. Fierce as I am, I give it freely. Not because you saved me. Not because you saved the colony. But because you stood beside me when no one else dared." The square went silent. Warriors who once feared Rhina now stared in wonder. They had never seen their strongest bow her pride. Marco's eyes widened. He had never expected such words from her. Slowly, he reached out his hand, not as a warrior, but as himself. "Then I will guard your heart as you guard mine. Together, Rhina." Her hand met his, rough and strong, closing over his gently. For a moment, the colony seemed to breathe as one. From that day forward, the colony began to change. No longer was it a place where humans were outsiders and aliens stood apart. They rebuilt the walls together. They planted crops side by side. They repaired the shields with Marco's machines and defended the borders with Rhina's warriors. Children grew up hearing the story of the human and the fierce alien woman who fought as one. It was no longer just a tale of battle, but a lesson of trust. Rhina became not only the fiercest warrior but also the heart of her people. Marco became not only an engineer but also a leader who guided with wisdom. Where she was fire, he was calm water. Where he was fragile, she was strong. And together, they were unbreakable. One evening, many weeks after the battle, Rhina and Marco stood on the high wall of the colony. The twin suns sank below the horizon, painting the sky in red and gold. Rhina folded her arms, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon as she always did. "The raiders may return one day," she said. Marco nodded. "Then we'll be ready. Together." She looked at him, her fierce face softening. "When I first met you, I thought you were weak. But you have taught me that the strongest shield is not iron or stone. It is the bond between hearts." Marco smiled, watching the suns fade. "And you taught me that courage is not in machines or clever hands. It is in standing firm, even when the world shakes." They stood in silence, side by side. For the first time, Rhina did not feel the need to guard herself. She was not only the fiercest warrior. She was a woman who had found her equal, her partner, her heart. The night wind blew softly, carrying the voices of the colony behind them, laughter, songs, the sound of life returning. Rhina and Marco did not speak again. They did not need to. Their hearts, once strangers, now beat as one. And so, in a colony once divided by fear, an alien warrior and a human builder began a new story, one of strength, unity, and love that no blade could ever break.